Great. Well, thank you for joining. We're going to get started as people continue to join the room. My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, and I am the co-founder of MentorCore. And today we are here to speak with Barbara Ann Buller about dreams of being a compliance officer and also kind of what some of the trends are. So Dan is my other co-founder. And Dan, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dan Ayala, co-founder of MentorCore. And Barbara, I'm really excited to have you here. I'm looking forward to this because in the security world we also have that same discussion about, well, how'd you get into this and how'd you get here? And I'm always interested in people's tales, and the same applies for all the people I've met on the compliance side. So I'm very interested in hearing about this. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been watching your programming over the last couple of months, and I'm excited to be on this side of the Zoom call.
Yes.
So my name is Barbara Beeler. I am Director of Programming currently for Compliance Week, and I mostly put together the conferences and educational programs. In addition, I work as an adjunct lecturer at Suffolk Law School and at Boston University Law School here in Boston, in also putting together educational programs really for new compliance officers. So I'm excited to be here to talk about this when I grow up theme. So I have a few slides. We don't have to get to the slides, but I thought I would start with I won't grow up. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I added this in because I was doing a little research on this, idea of what people wanted to be when they grow up. And this has now become an earworm for me. And so I can't not think in terms of this song. I don't know if you know it from Peter Pan from long ago. So I was hoping that if I put it on a slide, I could just leave it now, and it won't continue to be an earworm for me. So, but it does kind of speak to, so this whole idea of a compliance officer reciting rules, or this sort of thought that, if you're certainly if you're thinking about what you want to be when you grow up, maybe compliance officer doesn't, spring to mind. Continuing along this vein, in my vast research that I did on what people wanted to be when they grew up, I found this online, or the survey that Lego did in conjunction with the Harris poll. It was really about, I think what they were trying to find out is, do kids still want to be astronauts when they grow up? So you can see that the astronaut line is highlighted, and apparently people in the United States and in the United Kingdom do not grow up wanting to be an astronaut, nor do they grow up wanting to be a compliance officer. They really want to be YouTube bloggers. So I thought that was fascinating.
I wonder to what extent that replaced movie star.
I know, right? Yeah, I guess maybe it's all the merch that they get. I don't know. Used to YouTube bloggers. There's not a lot of merch in the compliance realm. YouTube bloggers, and of course, teacher remains. And I think probably when all of us were growing up, teacher, doctor, lawyer, maybe astronaut were high on the list. Not so much compliance officer. But what, and also, I think though, kind of as a bridge, although I don't really have a bridge slide, I have been teaching new compliance officers and those who are interested in becoming compliance officers for the past 8 or so years at Suffolk. And when I went to law school a long time ago, it wasn't really a thing. I think that compliance was definitely an alternative legal career, but not even really a this is terrible, but a well thought of alternative legal career. But I have to say that in the past 8-10 years, it has become a very well thought of alternative legal career, and something that law schools are really focused on cultivating. And so maybe 2 years before I started teaching at Suffolk, I got my first ever request from a student. It was a first year student, and they at law school days, and they wanted to be a compliance officer, and they asked me for some time. And this is before the class was even sort of a thought. And I thought that was kind of a pivotal moment for me, that people were sort of interested in becoming a lawyer compliance officer, and then actually looking for information and kind of reaching out. And then 2 years later, that person became part of my first class at Suffolk. And now, 8 years later, they have a very nice career in compliance, so I've kind of seen that whole evolution. So I thought that that was a kind of a turning point. And so I have to say now, 8 years in, I regularly have conversations with students who are interested in compliance, both from Suffolk, from BU, and just even from the Compliance Week relationship, or even just from LinkedIn. I see that you are a compliance officer. Tell me more about that. I did think this was interesting, though, in terms of what millennials are interested in. And there has been a big change, and I wonder if this maybe helps in terms of maybe alternative thoughts of practice, that people are not so concerned with just a paycheck. They want to think about how they fit into the larger organization. Satisfaction is more important. Certainly things like work-life balance are more important to the millennials. And I should say the millennials, but certainly the folks that are coming up behind me. I am absolutely a Gen X, and so we think a little bit differently than the folks behind us. And so maybe 20 or so years ago when I was in law school, the normal pattern would have been you go in-house, or you go rather to a large law firm. Now they're really thinking about what they want their career to look like long-term. And Lisa Beth, I'm certain that you talk with folks all the time about this very thing in terms of how they want to structure their long-term career. It's much more thoughtful.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because you brought up the concept, like compliance wasn't really a thing. And I'll tell you, when I was going to law school, compliance was definitely not a thing. And we over the last 20 years, I have seen this profession grow and change and be one that was very attractive. I think some similar things can be said about information security, right? Information security was part of IT, and that's it, right? It wasn't actually a thing like it is now, right? It wasn't a profession that had cachet to it, and it has a really strongly defined purpose and is considered a good job, as opposed to like a default where people who burned out in a primary profession went, right?
Well, we all know that's really what security is, right? No, of course not. Well,
right.
Well, my question for both of you is, did you either of you start? I know, Lisa Beth, you didn't start in compliance.
No.
Barbara, did you?
My first sort of real job out of law school was a compliance role, which is
okay.
I don't know that I thought, while I was in law school, I want to be a compliance officer. I don't know if I really knew what one was, and I'm not 100% certain that new law students or new students in business schools really know what one is even now,
even today,
or that we even know what one is, because they look so different depending upon industry
right.
and role. And that's kind of one of the challenges, because it's hard to get your arms around what a compliance officer does, because it differs. So I sort of see my course as it's very foundational. So it's the elements of a compliance program, sort of the 7 elements, and we kind of focus on that. But it's almost more about, would this make sense for you? Can you try this on? Does it resonate? And can you see yourself doing it? What are the pockets where you might fit in well, and trying to introduce them to as many people and opportunities and conferences and information as possible, because that's really the thing. It's the information barrier. So I'm hoping that it is, and even if they decide, I don't ever want to be a compliance officer, I want to have a more traditional law practice, then my hope is that they have a better understanding of what it is their compliance officer brethren are kind of going through, or how maybe to work better with their compliance officers internally.
And I think
that breadth is valuable.
This is really important as we talk about mentoring and how to help people who might be interested in the profession understand more about it, right? So yes. You asked about my first job. Compliance didn't really exist. I went to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which some people may consider
there's compliance there,
right? Like I consider that to be, but it wasn't like I wasn't hired as a compliance person there. I was hired as an attorney, right? I was hired as an attorney advisor, and I was there for Enron and September 11th and everything like that. I mean, kind of in the room where it was happening, right? When you had, Sarbanes-Oxley coming out and everything like that. But yeah, like there wasn't a course of study when I was growing up as a baby lawyer. And there weren't really well-defined guidelines for what a compliance program looks like or why you'd have one. So I think this is still relatively new.
Yeah, you wonder too what makes it a thing. And so that there, and we were talking a little bit before we started about SCCE's conference. Big conference was this week. And so I had the ability to look at look into some of the sessions, which were fantastic, and that we come together, there were, I don't know, more than 800 people signed up for that conference. And that's on a not great year, normally more people attend in person,
Right.
so that many people can kind of come together as a discipline, it says something that there are exams, that there are certifications, that there are courses of study popping up all over, really says something. And I think that the law school is kind of, onto it. Not that you need to be a lawyer by any stretch to be a compliance officer, but they've definitely seen this as a very viable alternative career for JDs, and the JDs are definitely taking to it.
Is it a path that once you're on it, I'm trying to recount it. I was having a discussion with somebody who got the advice when he left a particular field and veered off a little bit into something else he loved, similar but not same, was you could never come back. And is this one of those paths where you can jump from in-house attorney to compliance back and forth, or to a practicing attorney or prosecutor and back and forth? Or is it pretty much it's a path and you start down that path and you continue
and
on?
You can never leave. It's like the Hotel California.
Well,
you can check out, you just can never leave.
Well, you joke, but there are definitely those paths. If you ever want to get back on those rails, there are definitely fields that you can't leave if you think you want to come back to them. Culturally.
I don't know. I mean, like anything, I think once you have a certain amount of experience in an industry or a kind of a position, it can be difficult to pivot. But I think that we do pivot quite often, so it's
Right.
a traditional sort of going from maybe the law department to the compliance department. If you've spent some time in the law department, it's probably easier to go back to the law department rather than if you've never been there. It could be difficult to just go right from compliance back to the law department. Not that it should, but it could be. It also can be difficult to jump industries. So it can, if you have I'm now 17, 18 years into financial services, it would be hard for healthcare compliance to take me seriously. Unless I do something that is, maybe if I'm more of a privacy officer rather than a broker dealer compliance officer, but doing privacy and financial services. I do have a good friend who is a chief privacy officer now in pharmaceuticals and spent a long time in financial services. And so that seems to be able to kind of jump industries.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate. I think oftentimes people who are doing the hiring are not really thinking outside of the box. And if they want these 10 things, they want you to be doing these 10 things at exactly their competitor.
And having already done everything you're going to do in the new job,
right?
Because no one would find that boring to do the same job again.
Exactly. Yeah. So you need to have a good story, and you need to find a willing ear and kind of someone who is, open to that. And I think the best managers are open to, sort of an alternative view, because it is boring to construct a compliance department even with people who only have the same skill set and background, and then you cultivate this group of people who are agreeing with each other on everything because that's the way they think, which is not a great way to go.
It does create a good echo chamber, but
yes, yeah.
Sure. Mutual admiration society really is all you could want at work. So I guess the follow-on question to that is compliance a track that you need to start out in? It doesn't sound like it is. If you're coming later in your career or you're down the road a bit and you see that this is something that's interesting, it is possible to jump in
Yeah,
Great.
so the Suffolk class is and this is all just kind of a microcosm, you know, but the Suffolk class is a night class, and so that is it's early night though, so it sort of straddles the day. So I'll get some day students, I'll get some night students, and so the night students have maybe experience in compliance or you know, as I just generally get 3 different kinds of students: some experience in compliance, some interest in compliance, or it fit in my schedule. So, and then we try to convert the people who it just fit in the schedule. But it's you know, I don't know that it's necessary to always sort of start in compliance or always have been. The classes at BU, it's a little bit different because it's a certification program. So
Okay.
people have had whole careers and are now thinking, well, maybe I could, not to use that word pivot again, but pivot to compliance after this, you know, this experience. And it makes for a richer, it certainly makes for richer conversations within the classroom. You know, so if you're an operations person or a securities person, you know, and you're a data scientist and you're thinking that you might have an interest in compliance, I think that would be kind of, all of those things would be kind of phenomenal backgrounds.
Great.
Well, I think I would agree with you 100%. And, you know, I was listening to a discussion earlier today. Louis Sapperman, who is over at Panasonic, was talking about how he came into compliance from employment. And with the Me Too movement, holy cow, what a blockbuster set of skills it would be to have somebody who knew about employment law and could handle some of the challenges in the relationship between HR and legal and compliance all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, both the good and the bad is that there's no pattern card sort of template for what you must be in order to be a compliance officer. So that leaves the door, you know, open. So I think you just need a really creative program and sort of senior leadership that is open to, you know, take some chances and try to construct a really interesting team.
Nice.
Terrific.
So the I have a few slides on, let's see, how do I progress? Sort of what law schools are doing. And again, it's funny. So I presented to SCCE in Boston with a friend of, he's become a friend now, who's assistant director of career services at Suffolk. And so I tend to always make sure, because I like for my compliance course to have kind of be rooted in the idea that people want to get a job after law school. So
it's shocking.
Yes. So it's not a doctrinal course at all. It's really meant to be very common sense. So I try sort of towards the end of the course or in the middle of the course, which this year was great because it was all Zoom and it was easy to get people to join a Zoom call, you know, to join or to come to us as you know, guest speakers, and so that they can hear not just from me, but from people in health law and people in different compliance verticals. So we presented at SCCE in Boston a couple of years ago, and a lot of the audience were very irritated with us because I think that the thought was, well, you're saying that, you know, you have to be a lawyer to be a compliance officer. And I don't think that that's the case at all. I do think it's interesting, though, that the law schools are onto it, you know, are onto it as a really good, viable career for law students. And I do think law students make really good compliance officers because they do come out of school with, you know, they know how to read a rule. They're good writers, you know, and so that they usually can think out of a problem or think their way around a problem. That said, it should not be, I don't think it should be, as we were talking about, the case that only law students or only lawyers are populating our compliance departments. But it's definitely opportunistic, I think. And so right now, that's what the law schools are doing. So you're going to see lots of conversations at NALP, National Association of Law Professional Placement, where, you know, we're talking about, you know, how do we make our JD students interesting to hiring managers, and what can we offer them? Really practical ideas about how to be able to maybe cultivate some real life experiences. So BU, just within the past year and a half, has started a compliance clinical. I think it's the first of its kind, and it's very interesting. So they have actually, I don't know, 10 or 15 students who were doing compliance work in a compliance clinical, much like you would if you were in the prosecutor's clinical, or I did the housing law clinical when I was in law school. And so they're really trying to be able to impart some very practical skills to JDs.
And I think that there's actually for law schools that are doing more and more compliance work or having more and more compliance classes, I think that there are more and more internships or externships that are being offered. I know that we had an extern this summer for the company that I run. And so I think that those are opportunities for people to get some practical experience, because historically, lawyers went and did clerkships with either judges or law firms, which doesn't give you that taste of what is this profession like and why would I even want to be part of it?
Absolutely. And there's an empathy, I think, that they get from that kind of experience that they don't necessarily have when they leave law school. And I remember that we had when I was at first in my first compliance role, there were a number of people kind of around the table. And because at large firms, sometimes there are more compliance and risk people around the table than there are the business people whose challenge we're looking to solve. And so one of the very new compliance officers was pretty dismissive towards the business person that was in the room, who had a good 20 years experience in the business, but not a law degree. And sometimes you can graduate, it is possible to graduate with law school with a little feeling of superiority. Well, I'm the lawyer and you're not the lawyer, and therefore you're going to do it the way I
just a little.
Yeah, it does breed that a little bit. So I think that ability to have a good conversation with the business and to understand that the business brings to it something very different is important. So hard skills are important, but you can learn the regulation. The softer skills, I think, are something that are a little bit more difficult to share with the student.
Yeah, and then as on the other side of that is the non-attorney, but one who spends much of his day working with both compliance professionals and attorneys. I've noticed this change over the past 5 to 7 years of a focus on true business mindedness, and it's been quite a nice evolution.
Yes, yeah, the trying to get away from that business of always saying no or being the roadblock, or
that's the security guys department.
Yes.
No.
We're happy to have you take that over.
No, we're 20 years trying to get out of that, but we're saddled with the same historical affliction.
So just a couple slides, and I can share this with anyone who's interested, but taken from NALP about the JD advantage and kind of directionally where the law schools see this going. I mean, it's there just are not as many traditional law jobs anymore. So I think that this also is opportunistic for that reason. And so interestingly too, the breakdown and the numbers are a little bit dated, so it's going back to 2016. But they are 48% are coming from the business, and of those people in the business, it's all compliance people, as you might imagine, or mostly compliance people. So it really has become a very, very viable, very tenable, very expected, and much more traditional way of using the law degree than it was back when I was in school.
Do you know if with this change toward more more compliance, more business focus, is there less jobs? Are there more or less people entering law school now? Do we know?
I don't have the numbers. Yes, but in general, I believe that there are many less attorneys or soon to be attorneys than there have been in recent years. Some of that, I think, is the cost. It's always been incredibly expensive. It continues to be incredibly expensive. And there have been some really interesting lawsuits over the past few years from sort of new lawyers suing, because they're not getting the jobs that they expected after becoming, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So
Wait,
I
that's
do
an
think,
option? I can sue when I don't get a job? That's excellent.
yeah, there, I don't,
Just because you can sue just
Oh, this is
about
true.
over anything,
You can
may not
sue.
win.
yeah, there have been, so I feel like there has been a little bit of a little bit of backlash. I don't know what the incoming 1Ls look like for this year, but that will be interesting to see too,
Mhm.
because of the whole COVID thing. So, would it, be a good year maybe to defer? I think probably a lot of students are deferring rather than starting a year that they're not in person, to the extent that they're not in person.
There's yeah,
Well, and
so now
interestingly,
see
go ahead.
within the university, the mindset is this is not the year to take the deferral because the position you were given may or may not be there when you come back in a year.
I see. Yeah.
So the advice, and this is not just advice on to try and encourage enrollment. It really is. This is for now. This is not given to punt a year.
Yes.
And we expect and generally expect that enrollments will continue to rise. People in times of crisis head toward education.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I think law school in recent years has suffered, but I don't know. I don't have the numbers, but
Well,
it'll
and
be very interesting to see.
interestingly enough, we have another MentorCore session that's coming up. I think it's in November, on the 1L decision in a pandemic. Like, what choices do you make? Because now's the time where you'd start getting ready to apply and taking your LSAT if you can take it. Because I'm not even aware of like how they're running some of these testing sessions. I know the SAT has been postponed and it's been really challenging, but making a decision about whether to pursue that higher education, whether it's law school or what have you, during this time when you may not be meeting, it has been really challenging. So that's going to be another interesting session where we could talk about that. And I'm sure some of what you're talking about will come up then as well.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's November 11th, by the way, 1L in a pandemic, choosing law school. I'm putting the link in the chat if you'd like to register now.
yeah, that'll be a fascinating conversation. I think I do feel particularly bad though for the students who have just graduated and have had their bar exams, deferred. It's a tough year to graduate. So if anyone does, get the opportunity to do any sort of networking call with a new grad, that would be sure very much appreciated.
Well, and I think it's new grads across the board. I know that a lot of the accountants, their CPA exams have been postponed. And so, right, this is part of the reason why when Dan and I decided to start MentorCore, we were like, there's no perfect time to start it, but this is a good time because we need to be supporting not only each other, but people who are trying to think about coming into our industries as well, because it's
Absolutely.
tough.
Yeah, and what I'm hoping to do with this course and with the BU course is when I bring in a guest speaker, the best case scenario is if that guest speaker is able to, or if the students are able to connect with that guest speaker. And so actually, Mary Shirley, who I know that you've had, on the show.
On the I guess we call it the MentorCore event, MentorCore show, whatever.
Has hired Suffolk students, and so that's the best case scenario for me. And Mary has come into the class as well, so if we can start to have this sort of pipeline of students with great opportunities, I mean, that's fantastic.
Well, and I also know that one of the things that a lot of our listeners have talked about is how do you get those first speaking engagements and how do you find those opportunities? Like, guess what? There are tons of law school classes. There are tons of, courses across the country where you could probably talk to a professor and say, hey, if there's an opportunity, I would love to share X, Y, and Z about what it's like to work in this profession. Right? That's a great way to hone your skills and get some experience under your belt that's very, valuable for everybody involved.
Absolutely, and it's a good thing it's karmically a good thing to do too. I mean, it helps the students out. It really does. They get really tired really fast of hearing the same voice. I almost feel like I'm their parent, and you're going to get tired of me really fast. So to bring in another voice, even if it's saying something very similar, is helpful, and for them to kind of hear it in another way or hear from a different industry and make those connections. And those connections are the most important, I think. And so that has been, people have been tremendously giving of their time and in coming back to school to speak. And so I'm always really thankful of that. And it's in some ways the pandemic has made that a little bit easier because it's super easy to dial in to a Zoom call and talk to students who are fascinated with your story. And it's not like you have to do a lot of prep. It's talking about your story. That's the part.
I'm hopeful that those parts of education, the way that both teaching and learning and assessment are changing as a result of the pandemic. I hope some of these persist beyond, because I think they're innovations that the time has come, bringing more people in remotely. I like being able to come to a conference and talk and not have to book 3 days out to do it.
It's funny, I've heard both things. So certainly everyone is online and becoming more comfortable with the Zoom meetings. I had a really interesting call with someone at another law firm who is developing a certificate program, and her competency is mostly in sort of developing online learning. And I thought, you're going to be just flat out busy right now because everyone must be coming to you to develop the online learning because it's not easy. I have an asynchronous course that I had a lot of help with in terms of developing, and I needed that help. And she said, I'm finding that people think they know now because they have a semester of Zoom under their belt. And so there's almost like, oh, we've got that, which is not great, because the content is not, especially the truly doctrinal content isn't really okay via Zoom chat. It needs a little more of a little more cohesion than that.
Well, and there's a step in education beyond Zoom, which is remote learning, and then you move to true online learning, which is much more asynchronous, much more self-driven, but a content with a rich requires completely retooling the pedagogy, and that's where I think this is a step toward that. But this is. I'm just hopeful that some of the things we learn won't all roll back to you must all be around a physical table and all the time.
Yes, no, I think it has to get better. It's moving in the right direction, certainly.
Good.
And so these are just what we've been talking about, sort of those skills that that we hope that you leave law school with, and how they filter over into a compliance role potentially. And do you think those who have hired students, I think, have been really pleasantly surprised with how quickly they have been able to kind of learn and pick it up. So I do think that has been very good for the program in terms of having people kind of come back to us and look for more students and make recommendations, which is also good. The typical law student, it's funny. I don't know that, I think there isn't so much typical anymore, and especially with my courses because it's night school for the most part. And so my typical student is atypical. I definitely have some students who are coming right from undergrad into law school and finding themselves in my class maybe in second or third year. And then I also have a lot of students who have a lot of experience. And, it's a little bit daunting to lead a course where you may have the same level of compliance experience as those who are in the room, but on the same, by the opposite token, it's kind of a great conversation, because you can't know everything, and so you come from a place where, we're going to talk about culture of compliance. This is my experience, but let's talk about, your experience, and that adds a nice counterbalance to the course. And so most of the course, and again, it's not a doctrinal course, it's about the elements of the compliance program. It's really more of a discuss, share, kind of course than it is, let's learn this law and I'll just quiz you on that.
You know what I loved about what you said, because I think it actually exemplifies your leadership, is that you acknowledge that somebody else in your class as a student may be bringing something to the table that you have no experience in, and then you ask them in to share more. And I think that's something that, for me, when we talk about mentoring, right, you should be learning something from everyone. And whether they have more experience in social media or more experience in having grown up in a different part of town, right? There's always something to learn. And when you go about it that way, I think it does enrich any discussion, whether it's the classroom or in your own interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm waiting for the day where someone from one of my courses is hiring me for something, or I'm applying for a job and they're on the other end of it, because it's a very small world. You know, Boston is small. Compliance in general is small. And
Mm-hmm.
so the experience of working with Compliance Week has, because I was really only financial services, and you just see the commonalities cross industry so much, and the challenges are the same no matter what firm you're at, what industry you're dealing with.
Yeah, and there are a couple of comments in the chat. Just to let people know, it's not higher education, but IAPP has offered the ability to take their certifications from your home. So you're able to run on a software that's proctoring to watch to make sure that you're not cheating. And my own personal hope is that that is going to be something that we do all the time,
But the
because
irony of IAPP using software with cameras and such is really interesting. But those who don't know, IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, but
is monitoring what you're doing.
yeah, there's a whole set of discussions around cameras and camera use that can prove quite interesting and long and lively. But yeah, no, I think the evolution of this space, especially assessment, is way overdue, and is very welcome.
Mm-hmm. And there was another comment, just really quickly, because they said humility is so important in a leader, and Barbara, you have that in spades.
Oh, thank you.
which is a lovely combination with the fact that you're super capable and versatile.
I love your audience. This is great.
Our audience apparently loves you too.
So a friend of mine sent this to me a while back, and I can't not use it in every presentation because I just love it so much.
I love that.
I know. It's from Craigslist, where you get all of your finest compliance talent.
And oh, so much more.
That's right. But I just love this. And what makes a good compliance officer? So certainly we spend a lot of time in my class talking about the competencies of the compliance officer and how there really isn't a template. But I thought that this was kind of funny. And it's all relative, I would imagine. Relatively clean record we're looking for here.
Relative to what?
Exactly.
I'm sure we can come up with some examples.
Yes. Yeah. So this was a real ad, that was out there. And I want to say, look how far we've come, but I don't even think it's that old. So, but it's fascinating. But so essentially though, with the course, it's mostly teaching about, or not really teaching, but addressing communications issues, and sort of what can we offer, or how do we think about this in terms of being able to be good, internal partners with our clients. And so one of the things that I do at the class, and I include gratuitous puppy picture here just because everyone has a COVID puppy right now. I feel like everyone in my neighborhood has a puppy, and it's just cute. But one of the things that we do in the class, which I've done now actually each year, and I do it with groups of compliance officers as well, through like the ABA and National Society for Compliance Officers. But we do this cupcake exercise. And so the students are told, we are going to do a policies and procedures drafting exercise, which is a little bit of a fib. So I have half of the students work on drafting policies about how to frost cupcakes, and they are the compliance department. And then I have the other half of the students work in an operations role, and they frost cupcakes. And so they have the frosting, they have the cupcakes, and make them wear the funny hats and the gloves and the whole thing. I don't know what this is going to look like post-COVID or online, but when it's in person, it's kind of fun. So they frost the cupcakes, they're decorating them. They do that for about 20 minutes, and we kind of just see what happens. And every single time I've run this exercise, whether they are new to compliance or compliance practitioners for a long time, the same thing happens. And the compliance department doesn't ever talk to the operations department. And so when you ask the compliance department to read the policies and procedures, or how do you frost a cupcake, it doesn't resonate with how the cupcakes are actually getting frosted. And so for me, that is that's my favorite exercise. It's really all about how the cupcakes are getting frosted. And then, how do you have a regulator come in and ask those questions of the compliance department if they don't really know what's happening, on the floor? And so for me, that's the kind of thing that sort of brings it home for the student in a very kind of common sense way.
That's a great
I
example.
like that exercise. I might have to use that.
I think we might need to steal that exercise.
I really like that exercise because it's basic enough that it really calls out the differences.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I ran it with a group of banking compliance officers who had been in compliance for a long time, insurance compliance officers in insurance for a long time, securities officers, and students. And it's just, I don't know if it has to do with the direction, but they're never told you can't talk to people. And they do talk to each other because they'll say, pass me the M&Ms, or can I have one of those? But it never occurs to them to ask for, and I do think that this does sort of mirror often what happens in practice, where people just don't, their heads down doing their work. I've got to write this policy. And sometimes it doesn't occur to them, that they need to vet that policy, or that policy really needs to make sense for the people who are actually doing the work of enacting it. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. So that's kind of, I think that more than anything, that giving them an opportunity to have a network. And then actually even conversely, hoping that my friends, get some good, folks in their departments from my students are probably the most important things, I think, of the kinds of, curriculum that I can offer a student.
Great.
Well, that might be my last slide, I think. Did I end on the oh, that's my last slide.
So what I really liked about what you talked about is it resonates with a lot of what we're doing here with MentorCore, which is, right, anybody can learn the technical skills, right? What we think is really important is trying to allow people to foster their own softer skills, the skills that really make a difference in your long-term professional success, because anyone can have the right answer. It's how you deliver that information, get people to buy along, that makes the difference. And compliance, unfortunately, has suffered from I said so, this is what you're doing because I said so, approach for far too long, particularly in highly regulated industries. So one of the things that we always like to ask here at MentorCore is, what's the best advice that you've ever gotten from a mentor?
So it's funny, I have a hard time with this because I feel like every day, we were talking about this, every day there's a little piece, just even watching the sessions at SCCE this week. I mean, so much good advice, from all of those folks. I have to say, the idea that you are always growing your network. Someone said to me when I was in college, kind of, how they do that, look left, look right, people won't be here. Well, for me, it was look left, look right, this is your network, and so I try to keep people with me. So I regularly call on, folks that, I went to school with, or that I've worked with in the past, or that I volunteered with, so because those are your people, and so that I think was resonated with me. And then I had a chief compliance officer years ago that talked about, so one of the biggest differences or challenges, I guess, with teaching law students is to discuss the difference between the law department and the legal and the compliance department. Actually, that can be difficult even in practice. What is the difference between what I do and what the legal department does? And so he described it as sort of, think of the law department as kind of the architects of the big project, and think of the compliance department as kind of the project managers. And so I always use that with my students, and that really resonates with them. And I kind of like that too, because I always think of compliance as being a very practical job, so this is practical application, this is day-to-day kind of working through a problem and making sure that it gets solved for your constituents.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. So in terms of what advice you give to your students, what advice do you give to them as they're starting to make their way through this whole process and think about this career?
So most of it is to be open-minded. I think that, you know, especially, and I've had a couple of conversations with students just over the past couple of days, and they're really struggling. You know, it's tough. All of the things that worked before aren't really quite working right now. So I am suggesting that they use this time when everyone is painfully at home, you know, to talk to people. So to have some informational interviews. I mean, you know, they're not traveling. It should be not as difficult to get on people's schedule, and to kind of continue to kind of take ownership in their career in that way, because that they can do. So to do those things that you kind of can do, but it's a really tough time right now for them. And I do think, so, you know, to anyone who's listening who can kind of help out, you know, having those encouraging conversations with students and with people who are, you know, maybe have found themselves out of a job because of the pandemic. That's incredibly helpful. You know, just a kind word right now is helpful.
And I know we have a MentorCore member who I've just been kind of sitting in awe of by the name of Amy Landry. She has been documenting her process as she's making a shift in her career. And she's got some really interesting articles on LinkedIn about what it's like to go to a virtual career fair and pursuing different certifications, because this is a time when you can, you know, look at certifications as another way to differentiate in your market. So it's been interesting to see what some people have done in, you know, as they're trying to figure out what do next steps look like in the world of today.
Yes. Yeah, that is a great idea. And actually, it's funny, I just met Amy within the past few days too. So it is a very small compliance world.
Right.
I'll echo that. I'll echo that recommendation around getting in touch with people. We're having a discussion on a podcast that I do over the weekend, and we were talking about, you know, encouraging people to say, please reach out. And
Right.
so, you know, I'll offer for myself. I'll offer for Lisa Beth. You know, reach out and get in touch if there's people you need us to help you get in touch with, or if you have people to get in touch with. I know it was done for me many times through my career. But I am where I am because of people taking a moment and giving me a moment. And so whatever I can do to help pay that back, pay that forward as well, I absolutely want to do. And encourage others in the field, like you said, Barbara, to do that. This goes across all fields, not just compliance.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, there are, you guys both have tremendous networks too. So you don't even have to play the whole Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation.
Right.
I mean,
But we
like
could.
two degrees of separation between, or one, you know, between pretty much virtually anyone in any industry in compliance. You know, so it's a small, and it's a group of people who I think have come together in terms of a discipline who are aware that it's really tough sometimes inside or in-house. And so I think it's funny because we have the Compliance Week conferences, and often people say, I'm just so surprised that everyone is so, when they come to them for the first time, everyone's so passionate and friendly and excited to see each other. And they are, you know, because they're with their people, you know, and I do think that is one of the things that help to promote it truly as a discipline. And so people are happy to help. So you should absolutely reach out.
Any insights on how to make that first or help on making that first connection with somebody you may not know, but maybe you want to either meet directly or ask them for help in getting to somebody else?
Yeah, so for the Suffolk students, where we usually start is if you want to stay in the Boston area, there are a ridiculous number of Suffolk alumni, not necessarily the law school, just all across. I think that the numbers are like 70,000 Suffolk alumni in the Boston area. So you should start with your people, you know? So, because it's an easier conversation. And so often what we'll tell the Suffolk students is, reach out with, so it's a little bit of a warm lead, so maybe reach out through LinkedIn or contact your career services office and find out who is willing to talk to you about any particular industry. I regularly get calls from the career services office or people who have been referred to me through their career services office. I'm the token compliance person there, so if you want to talk to compliance, call Barbara, and I'm happy to have a conversation like that. And so also, I think people don't really use, so you paid a lot of money for this education, even if it was 20 years ago. So you should use your career services offices. That's what they're there for, and they're happy to have conversations with alumni, and they're happy to connect alumni with other alumni. So I think that that's kind of an inherent group that maybe people don't use enough of.
Yeah, so I think there's, of course, wherever your hometown was, wherever you ended up going to school, there are networks there, prior companies you worked for, right? Somebody was probably in charge of something that you'd be interested in, whether it was compliance or HR or something, and they might know someone. And one of my favorite things to do is just try to friend people who just gave a talk and tell them about what I thought about their talk. And if we have something in common, like I remember when I moved to Minnesota and I knew like no one, except I had an aunt who lived 2 hours north of town. I went to a talk and there was a woman who had spent 1 year going to Tulane, where I went to law school. And I went up to her right afterwards and I said, hey, guess what? I went to Tulane too. And that was the beginning of a wonderful friendship and relationship that has lasted for almost 15 years now. And, I mean, you just never know. I think just reach out, and the career services stuff is great. Following up with people who you've heard speak, who's had something interesting to say. The big thing from that, though, I think is don't go in cold, like, what can you do for me?
Well, that's
right? Because
the
that's
ask
growth.
there has to be not, the ask has to just be for information, and so I think usually those sort of after college are a little bit better at this. I used to teach a class of more business undergrads, and they needed a little bit more help, just in terms of guidance about this. And it was more that the ask is not, do you have a job? The ask is more, tell me about your practice, and then you hope to have a relationship and not just be looking for something from someone. So that ask, do you have a job is not going to be necessarily well received.
And relationships are a long game. They
Yes.
are about, it's not get into it, what can you give me now? It's how can I get to know people and build meaningful, strong relationships? And if something, and I want to be able to help you, and you may be able to help me down the road, but you don't do it for what you can get out of it. You do it because we need people in our lives. And it's important now more than ever to build relationships, because it's very isolating, both in this field, which was part of why we did MentorCore, but also this time when we can't necessarily go out and do all the things with the people we want to.
And I know that MentorCore does this, and some other organizations do this as well, but we've been trying to feature one person a month to do a spotlight. And last month it was Wendy Badger, who is one of our members, but showing up and saying, hey, I'm interested in, being featured so that I can get to meet more people and they can learn a little bit about, like, hey, what's your favorite book, right? Like, what are you reading right now? If you weren't in this profession, what would you be doing? Party planning.
That's not really the profession to get into right this second.
Right. No. Well, right.
Distributed party planning, where you all get the same thing and you all celebrate together.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, I think that these are all ways that you can start to connect with other people and, drive meaningful connections rather than just transactional.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then you find, because you don't really know where your career will take you. So my last in-house compliance role, it was just me. So the only legal person. And so I didn't have the luxury of talking to other people in my department or the law department. There wasn't one. you know, so the people that I relied on were those people that I, you know, used to work with and I went to school with and that were part of my network. And so we actually, there's a Boston area compliance group that meets as well. So you should look for those kinds of organizations and also
Yeah.
within industry organizations, as well as, you know, places like Compliance Week and SCCE.
Yeah, industry plus local affinity is,
Yes.
and when those two things can combine, the local affinity is
It's a
very cool
powerhouse.
stuff.
Yes. And then it's
Powerhouse.
funny. It's like when you're in your first year class on research and they tell you if you keep finding the same answer, you've hit upon the right answer. Well, sometimes then you find that you keep finding the same people. You know, you've hit upon the right people. And
Oh, I
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a perfect note to say thank you so much. You are
Thank
one
you.
of the right people. We're
Oh,
so glad that you were able to join us for this event. And I know you guys have, you know, an upcoming event starting tomorrow for Compliance Week with the third party risk management.
we
And there's
do.
right, and that's one of those that you should definitely listen into.
It's a free
And
event. Let me know. I will send you a comp code.
yeah, yeah. So for all the people on the call, if you're interested in third party risk management, go talk to her, get the code, make it happen. But we are so grateful that you were willing to give your time and your talent today to MentorCore. We
Thank
really
you so much
appreciate
for
it.
having me. This was a lot of fun.